How can inheriting a forgotten farm from a grandmother you barely remember turn into a trap that exposes your deepest enemies? When my dog vanished and screams echoed from my barn, I knew this inheritance was more than land. It was a stage for revenge. What I uncovered behind that barn door would flip every assumption my traders had about who they were dealing with. The farmhouse looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood: weathered gray siding, sagging front porch, and windows that seemed to watch everything with tired eyes. I hadn't seen Grandmother Evelyn since I was 12, when my parents decided her old-fashioned ways weren't suitable for raising a modern child. Now, at 38, I was back with nothing but a divorce settlement, a severance package from my software engineering job, and my 8-year-old yellow lab, Daisy. The key turned easily in the front door, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through dirty windows. The furniture was covered in white sheets, giving the place the feel of a museum or a mausoleum. Daisy trotted ahead of me, her tail wagging as she explored each room with the enthusiasm only dogs possess. In the kitchen, I found it, a handwritten note on yellowed paper, placed deliberately in the center of the old wooden table. The handwriting was spidery, unfamiliar. Some inheritances come with more than land. The past has a way of settling scores. Watch the barn. Trust no one who knew you before. I read it 3 times, my stomach knotting tighter with each pass. Who had left this? The lawyer, Victor Trent, had given me the keys just yesterday, assuring me the property had been sealed since Grandmother Evelyn's passing 6 months ago. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket, deciding to ask Victor about it later. The next morning, I drove into town to buy supplies at Morrison's hardware store. I needed basic tools, cleaning supplies, and feed for the few chickens that apparently came with the property. The store was exactly what you'd expect in a small farming community: narrow aisles crammed with everything from nails to saddles, and the smell of leather and motor oil hanging in the air. I was examining a set of wrenches when I heard the familiar laugh that had haunted my high school years. Carter Lynch stood near the register, his expensive boots and pressed jeans a stark contrast to the working clothes of the actual farmers around him. At 41, he'd maintained the broad shoulders and confident smirk that had made him popular 2 decades ago, though his hairline had retreated and his waist had expanded. "Well, well," Carter said loudly enough for the entire store to hear. "If it isn't Ethan Barron, back from the big city. Heard you inherited old Evelyn's place." The conversations around us quieted as people turned to watch. I nodded politely. "Carter, good to see you." "Is it, though?" He approached with the swagger of someone who owned the room. "I mean, what's a computer nerd going to do with a working farm? You probably don't even know which end of a cow to milk." A few customers chuckled. Behind Carter, I noticed a younger man with calloused hands and a tool belt. Probably Charlie Rivers, the handyman I'd heard about. He was grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd seen all week. "I'm just getting settled," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Learning as I go." "Learning as you go," Carter repeated mockingly. "That's rich. Hey, Charlie, remember when city folks tried to learn as they go? Usually ended with us having to fix whatever they broke." Charlie stepped forward, his grin widening. "Oh yeah, like that guy who tried to fix his own tractor and ended up flooding his whole field. Or the lady who thought she could handle a bull because she'd seen it on TV. The laughter was louder now, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks. These people didn't know me, but they were already writing me off as another incompetent outsider. "Speaking of learning," Carter continued, "you might want to learn that some properties around here come with complications. Old Evelyn was a bit eccentric toward the end, if you know what I mean. A lot of strange stories about that place." "What kind of stories?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Carter shrugged. "Oh, just talk. People going missing, animals acting strange. Probably nothing a smart city boy like you can't handle, right?" The way he said it made it clear he thought I couldn't handle anything more challenging than a software glitch. I paid for my supplies quickly and left, their laughter following me out to the parking lot. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I'd hoped never to see again: Veronica Barron. My ex-wife had kept my name after the divorce, claiming it was too much paperwork to change it back. I knew the real reason. She enjoyed the reminder of her victory. "Ethan." Her voice was crisp, professional. "I heard about your inheritance. I wanted to check in." "Check in?" I sat on the farmhouse porch, watching Daisy chase fireflies in the yard. "Since when do you check in on me?" "Don't be bitter. It doesn't suit you." There was that condescending tone I remembered so well. "I'm concerned about this decision to move to the middle of nowhere. It seems impulsive." "It's my inheritance, Veronica. My choice." "Is it, though? Because from what I hear, you're in over your head already." Carter mentioned you seemed pretty lost at the hardware store today. My grip tightened on the phone. You've been talking to Carter? We've been seeing each other, actually. Have been for a while. She paused, letting that sink in. He's been very helpful during my transition back to single life. Unlike some people, he knows how to take care of a woman. The knife twisted exactly as she'd intended. Carter Lynch, my high school rival, now my ex-wife's boyfriend. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I just think you should consider selling the property, Veronica continued. Take the money, move back to civilization. This whole farmer fantasy of yours is embarrassing. Embarrassing to whom? To anyone who knows you. You're a software engineer, Ethan. You work with computers, not cows. This is just another one of your midlife crisis phases, like when you bought that motorcycle you never rode. I ended the call without saying goodbye and sat in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of their judgment settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a city boy playing at being a farmer. But this was my grandmother's land, my inheritance, and I'd be damned if I'd let them drive me away without a fight. Around 10 o'clock, Daisy started barking near the barn. It wasn't her usual playful bark. This was urgent, almost frantic. I grabbed a flashlight and followed her across the yard. The barn loomed against the starlit sky, its weathered boards silver in the moonlight. What is it, girl? I asked, but Daisy just kept barking at the barn doors, her hackles raised. I tried the doors, but they were locked with an old padlock I didn't have a key for. Through the gaps between the boards, I could see nothing but darkness. After a few minutes, Daisy calmed down, though she kept glancing back at the barn as we walked to the house. The next morning, I found Daisy's collar in the mud near the barn doors. It was torn, as if she'd struggled against something, and there was no sign of her anywhere. I called her name until my voice was hoarse, searched every inch of the property, and even drove the country roads looking for any trace of yellow fur. She was gone. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a call from a blocked number. I answered, but heard only silence before the line went silent. The message was clear enough. Someone was watching, someone was in control, and I was powerless to stop them. I barely slept that night, listening for any sound that might indicate Daisy's return. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the eaves made me hope she was scratching at the door. But morning came with only silence and an empty yard that felt wrong without her cheerful presence. Memories of my childhood visits to the farm came flooding back as I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. I remembered grandmother Evelyn as a stern woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She'd never married, never had children of her own, and my father was her only nephew. When I was 12, something had happened, I'd never been clear on what, that made my parents decide these summer visits were inappropriate. I recalled fragments, hushed arguments between my parents and grandmother, my father saying something about filling the boy's head with nonsense, and my mother insisting I was too young for her stories. Grandmother Evelyn had watched from the porch as we drove away that last time, her expression unreadable. I'd waved, but she hadn't waved back. Now, 26 years later, she'd left me everything. The farm, the land, and apparently some kind of mystery that had already cost me my dog. Around noon, I drove to Mabel's Cafe in town, hoping to grab lunch and maybe overhear some local gossip about my grandmother or the property. The cafe was exactly what you'd expect. Red vinyl booths, a counter with spinning stools, and the smell of coffee and fried food. I took a booth near the back and ordered a burger. 2 booths away, I heard Carter's voice before I saw him. He was sitting with Veronica, their heads close together in conversation. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard enough to send a chill through me. Not right in the head, just like his grandmother was, Carter was saying. Already talking about strange noises, missing animals. Classic signs. He was always unstable, Veronica replied, her voice carrying that tone of concerned authority she'd perfected during our marriage. The divorce really broke something in him. I tried to help, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. My cousin's a nurse at the county mental health facility, Carter continued. Says they see this all the time. Middle-aged men having breakdowns, moving to isolated places, developing paranoid delusions. Usually ends with someone getting hurt. God, I hope it doesn't come to that, Veronica said with practiced worry. But if Ethan's having some kind of episode, well, someone should probably keep an eye on him, for his own safety. They were building a narrative, I realized, painting me as unstable, unreliable, possibly dangerous. But why? What did they gain from making me look crazy? I paid for my untouched burger and left through the back exit, not wanting to confront them directly. Not yet. That afternoon, I visited Linda Price, my nearest neighbor. Her small house sat about a mile down the dirt road, surrounded by flower gardens that looked like something from a magazine. Linda was in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. She invited me onto her porch for iced tea and seemed genuinely sympathetic about Daisy's disappearance. "Animals go missing sometimes," she said, rocking slowly in her chair. "Coyotes mostly, though we've had reports of a mountain lion in the area." Her collar was torn, I said, like she'd been fighting something. Linda nodded thoughtfully. "Your grandmother had trouble with missing animals too, toward the end. Lost 3 cats in 2 months. She was convinced someone was taking them, but..." She trailed off diplomatically. "But what?" "Well, Evelyn got a bit paranoid in her final years, started seeing threats everywhere, talking about conspiracies and people trying to steal her land. The lawyer, Mr. Trent, he tried to help her, but she wouldn't listen to reason." "What kind of conspiracies?" Linda hesitated, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "She claimed there were people in town who wanted her property, who were willing to do anything to get it. Said they were trying to make her look incompetent so they could challenge her will. Honestly, it broke my heart to see such a strong woman reduced to that kind of fear." "Did she mention any names?" "Oh, honey, she mentioned everyone. The mailman, the grocery clerk, even me a few times. That's how you know someone's really lost touch, when they start suspecting their oldest friends." As I prepared to leave, Linda walked me to my truck. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but maybe you should consider selling the property. It's a lot of work for one person, and with your grandmother's history, well, some folks in town might be watching to see if you develop the same problems she did." She pressed something into my hand, an old photograph. "I found this in some papers Evelyn gave me for safekeeping. Thought you might want it." The photo showed a much younger version of my grandmother standing in front of the barn with a man I didn't recognize. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Some debts take generations to collect. EB will understand when the time comes. EB, Ethan Barron." My initials. That evening, I walked the property boundaries, looking for any sign of Daisy and trying to make sense of the cryptic message. The fields were overgrown, the fences in need of repair, but the land itself was beautiful. Rolling hills that caught the sunset and held it like a golden bowl. I could see why someone might want it. Near the back corner of the property, I found disturbed earth, a patch about 6 feet long where the grass had been dug up and hastily replanted. The soil was darker than the surrounding ground, and when I knelt to examine it, a stench rose that made my stomach churn. Something had perished here, and not long ago. I was heading back to the house when I saw headlights coming up the drive. A pickup truck parked near the porch, and Charlie Rivers climbed out, carrying a toolbox. "Evening, Mr. Barron," he called out cheerfully. "Carter sent me over to help you get settled. Said you might need some work done around the place." I hadn't asked for help, and I certainly hadn't asked Carter to send anyone. "That's not necessary," I said. "I can handle things myself." Charlie's smile never wavered. Oh, it's no trouble. Carter's got a real generous spirit when it comes to helping neighbors. Plus, this old place needs a lot of work. More than one person can handle alone." I said I can handle it. Sure, Charlie nodded, but he was already walking toward the barn. "Just let me take a look at a few things, make sure everything's safe. Wouldn't want you getting hurt because of some structural problem your grandmother ignored." He tried the barn doors, testing the padlock. "You know, I could cut this off for you, get you access to your own property. Seems strange, being locked out of your own barn." "Leave it alone," I said sharply. Charlie raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, no problem. Just trying to help." He climbed back into his truck, but rolled down the window before leaving. "You know, Mr. Barron, folks around here look out for each other, but we also expect people to fit in, be part of the community. Hope you'll keep that in mind." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Play along, or face the consequences. After he left, I sat on the porch and stared at the barn. Whatever was inside, someone desperately wanted access to it. The question was whether they wanted to hide something or find something. Either way, I was starting to understand that this inheritance came with strings attached, and someone was pulling them tight around my neck. The next morning brought a visit from Deputy Alex Monroe, a serious-looking man in his early 30s with the kind of steady gaze that missed nothing. He stood on my porch with his hat in his hands, polite but official. "Mr. Barron, I've had some calls about your property," he said without preamble. "Complaints about strange noises, possible animal neglect. Thought I should check in?" "Animal neglect?" I stared at him. "My dog is missing. I've been looking for her for 2 days." "Yes, sir, I heard about that. I'm sorry for your loss." He made a note in his pad. "But there have been reports of animals in distress on your property. Crying, howling, that sort of thing. Your neighbors are concerned." I thought about the disturbed earth I'd found, the foul odor. Deputy, I think someone might be using my property to dump animals. I found evidence of... Sir, Monroe interrupted gently. I understand this is a stressful time. Moving to a new place, losing a pet, dealing with an inheritance. Sometimes stress can make us see things that aren't really there. There it was again, the suggestion that I was unstable, unreliable. Are you going to investigate the complaints or not? I'll take a look around if you don't mind. I led him around the property, showing him the disturbed earth, pointing out where I'd found Daisy's collar. Monroe examined everything with professional thoroughness, but his expression remained skeptical. Could be a lot of things, he said finally. Animals bury food, mark territory. That odor you mentioned could be from a possum or raccoon that didn't make it. As for your dog's collar, well, dogs can slip out of collars, especially if they're chasing something. Someone called you about animal distress, I said. Who was it? Anonymous tip? But between you and me, Mr. Barron, I'd be careful about making accusations without proof. Small towns have long memories, and your grandmother, well, she made some pretty serious claims toward the end that turned out to be unfounded. After he left, I drove straight to Morrison's general store, needing supplies and hoping to gauge the town's mood. The moment I walked in, conversation stopped. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with suspicious eyes, watched me like I might start shoplifting. I was reaching for a bag of dog food, Hope Springs Eternal, when Veronica appeared at the end of the aisle. She looked perfectly put together as always, her blonde hair styled and her clothes expensive but tasteful. Ethan, she said with false warmth, how are you holding up? I heard about poor Daisy. News travels fast. It's a small town. People talk. She moved closer, lowering her voice to a concerned whisper. Carter told me about the deputy's visit. Are you sure you're okay out there? All alone, dealing with stress, losing Daisy? Maybe you should consider staying in town for a while, just until you get your bearings. I'm fine where I am. Are you, though? Her voice carried that edge I remembered from our worst fights. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're falling apart, just like your grandmother did. The accusation hung in the air between us. Around us, I could feel other customers listening, filing away every word for later gossip. My grandmother was not crazy, I said quietly. Wasn't she? Veronica's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Then why did she spend her last years convinced everyone was plotting against her? Why did she make wild accusations about people stealing her animals, tampering with her property? Why did she end up alone and fearful, with half the town convinced she'd lost her grip on reality? Maybe because people were plotting against her. Veronica laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. Oh, Ethan, listen to yourself. You've been there less than a week and you're already talking like she did. Paranoid delusions, conspiracy theories. It's almost like mental illness runs in families. She walked away, leaving me standing in the dog food aisle with a dozen pairs of eyes watching my every reaction. I paid for my supplies and left without looking at anyone. That afternoon, I drove to Victor Trent's law office in the county seat, a larger town about 30 minutes away. Victor was in his mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that inspired confidence. He'd been my grandmother's lawyer for over 20 years, and he greeted me with genuine warmth. Ethan, I'm so glad you came in. I've been hoping we could talk. He poured coffee and settled behind his desk. How are you settling in? It's been challenging, I said carefully. I get the feeling some people in town don't want me there. Victor's expression grew serious. Your grandmother mentioned that concern. Toward the end, she became convinced that certain people were trying to force her off her land. Was she right? That's the question, isn't it? Victor pulled out a thick file. Evelyn was sharp as a tack right up until the end. I can attest to that. But she was also increasingly isolated and suspicious. It's possible she was reading malice into innocent actions. Or it's possible someone was very good at making their malice look innocent. Exactly. Victor leaned forward. Which is why she made certain provisions in her will. Provisions that most people don't know about. He opened the file and pulled out several documents. The basic inheritance is straightforward. You get the house, the land, the outbuildings, but there are additional clauses that only activate under specific circumstances. What kind of circumstances? If you can prove that anyone attempted to defraud you of your inheritance through illegal means, harassment, intimidation, property damage, anything like that, then you gain access to additional assets your grandmother set aside. Substantial assets. My pulse quickened. How substantial? Mineral rights to the entire county, for starters. Your grandmother's family has owned subsurface rights to most of the area for over a century. She never developed them, but recent geological surveys suggest significant natural gas deposits. The room seemed to spin. Are you saying? I'm saying that if someone is trying to drive you away from that property, they might have a very good reason, and if you can prove it, you'll own a lot more than just a farm. Victor pulled out another document. There's also this, a provision that allows you to transfer ownership of the property to yourself free and clear, bypassing any potential challenges to the will if you can demonstrate criminal interference with your inheritance. Criminal interference? Theft, vandalism, harassment, fraud, conspiracy, anything that could be construed as an attempt to illegally deprive you of your inheritance. Your grandmother was very specific about the language. I thought about Daisy's disappearance, the anonymous complaints to the sheriff, the coordinated campaign to make me look unstable. What kind of proof would I need? Documentation, witnesses, physical evidence. The more concrete, the better. Victor's eyes were kind but serious. Ethan, if someone is targeting you, be very careful, but also be very thorough. Your grandmother spent her last years gathering evidence of harassment that she couldn't quite prove. If history is repeating itself, don't make the same mistake. He handed me a key. Old brass, worn smooth with age. This is for the barn. Evelyn asked me to give it to you personally. After you'd had time to settle in, she said you'd know when the right time came to use it. I drove home with my mind racing. The property wasn't just a farm, it was potentially worth millions. That explained the pressure to sell, the campaign to make me look unstable, the coordinated effort to drive me away. Carter, Veronica, maybe others. They knew about the mineral rights. They wanted me gone so they could challenge the will or force a sale. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both my grandmother and me. That evening, I walked to the barn with Victor's key in my hand. The old padlock opened easily, and the barn doors swung wide to reveal nothing unusual. Hay bales, old farm equipment, the normal detritus of rural life. But there had to be more. I searched systematically, moving hay bales, checking behind equipment, looking for anything my grandmother might have hidden. In the back corner, behind a rusted plow, I found a loose board in the wall. Behind it was a metal box, locked but small enough to carry. Inside the farmhouse, I pried open the box. It contained dozens of documents, photographs, letters, financial records, and a detailed journal in my grandmother's handwriting. The journal entries went back 5 years and painted a picture of systematic harassment. Animals poisoned, equipment sabotaged, property damaged, all done subtly enough to look like accidents or natural causes. The photographs showed tire tracks in her fields, broken fences, and livestock that had been left lifeless. The letters were threatening, anonymous notes telling her to sell the property and leave town while she still could. The financial records showed repeated attempts by various parties to buy her land, with offers that started reasonable and grew increasingly aggressive. And throughout it all, 3 names appeared again and again: Carter Lynch, who'd been pressuring her to sell for years; Charlie Rivers, who'd been hired to help with property maintenance but seemed to cause more problems than he solved; and Veronica Barron, my own wife, who'd been in contact with my grandmother for months beforehand, supposedly helping with legal advice. The final entry in the journal was dated just 2 weeks before my grandmother's passing. They think they've won. They think I'm just a paranoid old woman who'll fade away quietly and leave them to fight over what's left. But I've made arrangements. Ethan will understand when the time comes. Some debts take generations to settle, but they are always collected in the end. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, reading and rereading the evidence my grandmother had compiled. By morning, I understood the scope of the conspiracy against me, and I had the beginnings of a plan to turn their own tactics against them. They wanted to play games? I'd show them how a methodical, patient man could win a war they didn't even know they'd started. The next morning, I drove to the county seat and purchased a complete digital surveillance system: cameras, motion detectors, recording equipment, and enough storage capacity to document whatever was coming next. I also bought a high-end laptop, backup drives, and software for organizing and analyzing evidence. If my grandmother's journal was accurate, Carter and his allies had been playing a long game of harassment and intimidation, but they'd been operating under the assumption that their targets were isolated and helpless. They'd never faced someone with my technical background and resources. Back at the farm, I spent the day installing hidden cameras around the property. I placed them in the barn, near the house, along the fence lines, and at the entrance to the driveway. Each camera was motion-activated, transmitted wirelessly to the main recording system, and was virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I also set up game cameras in the woods, positioned to catch anyone approaching the property from unexpected directions. By evening, I had comprehensive surveillance coverage and a system that would automatically back up all recordings to secure cloud storage. That night, I reviewed my grandmother's evidence more carefully, cross-referencing dates and events with public records I could access online. The pattern was clear. Whenever grandmother Evelyn had refused to sell her property, accidents and problems would mysteriously increase. A water line would break, flooding her basement. Her fence would be damaged, allowing livestock to escape onto the highway. Her cats would disappear one by one. Each incident was small enough to seem like normal rural problems, but together they painted a picture of systematic harassment designed to make an elderly woman's life unbearable. The goal was obvious: force her to sell or drive her to such distraction that her mental state could be questioned if she tried to leave the property to anyone else. The next morning brought another visit from Charlie Rivers. This time he didn't bother with pretense. He simply drove up to the barn and began examining the doors and windows like he owned the place. "Morning, Mr. Barron," he called out when he saw me. "Just checking on some work I did for your grandmother. Want to make sure everything's holding up." "I don't recall asking you to check anything." Charlie's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Well, see, your grandmother hired me to do some maintenance work right before she passed. Never got a chance to finish the job or collect payment. Figure I should at least make sure my work's not causing any problems. Send me a bill for whatever she owed you." "Oh, it's not about money," Charlie said, moving closer to the barn doors. "It's about professional pride. I take responsibility for my work, you know? If something I installed fails and causes damage, that's on me." He was testing the new lock I'd installed, rattling it like he was checking its strength. "This is new," he observed. "Old lock break?" "I upgraded the security." "Security?" Charlie laughed. "What do you need security for out here? It's not like you've got anything valuable in there." The comment was clearly a fishing expedition. He wanted to know if I'd found whatever my grandmother had hidden in the barn. "Just being careful," I said. "Careful's good," Charlie agreed. "But you don't want to be too careful, if you know what I mean. Sometimes being too suspicious makes people think you're paranoid. And once folks start thinking that..." He let the threat hang in the air, then climbed back into his truck. "I'll be back to finish that work," he called out as he drove away, "whether you want me to or not." That afternoon, I received a call from Deputy Monroe. "Mr. Barron, I've had another complaint about your property. This time it's about trespassing." "Someone's trespassing on my land?" "No, sir. Someone's claiming you've been trespassing on theirs. Says you've been walking their property lines, taking pictures, acting suspicious. They're worried you might be casing the place for a break-in." I closed my eyes, recognizing the tactic. "Let me guess. Anonymous complaint?" "Actually, no. This one came from Carter Lynch. Says his property borders yours on the east side, and he's seen you walking his fence line with a camera." "I was walking my own property line, Deputy, trying to understand my boundaries." "I'm sure you were, Mr. Barron. But maybe you could stick to the center of your property for a while, just to avoid any misunderstandings." After Monroe hung up, I sat on the porch and considered my options. They were escalating, trying to box me in with a series of complaints and restrictions. Soon they'd have enough evidence of my suspicious behavior to justify more serious intervention. But they'd made a mistake. They'd given me Carter's name. Now I had a specific target for my surveillance. That evening I drove to Linda Price's house with a specific purpose. She greeted me warmly, invited me in for coffee, and asked about my adjustment to rural life. "It's been challenging," I admitted. "I keep feeling like I'm missing something about my grandmother's final years." "You knew her better than anyone. Was she really as paranoid as people claim?" Linda hesitated, then sighed. "Evelyn was complicated. She'd always been private, independent, but toward the end she became intense. Always talking about people watching her, plotting against her." "Did you ever see any evidence of what she was talking about?" "That's the thing," Linda said slowly. "A few times I did notice odd things. Cars driving slowly past her property at night, her fence getting damaged more often than seemed normal, animals going missing." She paused. "But when I mentioned it to other people, they just said it was normal rural life. Teenagers joyriding, deer running into fences, coyotes taking pets. What did you think?" "I thought maybe the truth was somewhere in between. Maybe some of it was normal, and some of it wasn't. Maybe someone was taking advantage of an elderly woman's isolation to make her life difficult." "Why would someone do that?" Linda looked uncomfortable. "There were rumors about your grandmother's land. Stories about mineral rights, valuable deposits. Most people dismissed it as old wives' tales, but..." She shrugged. "Money makes people do terrible things." As I prepared to leave, Linda walked me to my truck. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I want to show you something." She led me to her back porch and pointed toward the woods that separated our properties. 2 nights ago, I saw lights moving through those trees, flashlights, like someone was walking your property in the dark. It was around midnight, and they were being very quiet about it. Did you call the sheriff? I thought about it. But then I remembered how they treated your grandmother when she reported similar things. They made her feel like a crazy old woman. Linda's expression was troubled. I don't want them to do the same thing to you. I thanked her and drove home, my mind racing. Linda had just given me crucial information. Someone was accessing my property at night, and there was at least one neighbor who'd witnessed it. More importantly, she'd revealed that she was starting to question the official narrative about my grandmother's mental state. That night, I sat in my darkened kitchen and monitored the surveillance feeds on my laptop. Around 1 a.m., motion detectors triggered near the barn. On my screen, I watched Charlie Rivers emerge from the woods, carrying a small toolkit and moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. He approached the barn and began working on the new lock with professional efficiency. It took him less than 5 minutes to defeat it. Clearly, he had more skills than his handyman persona suggested. Once inside, he moved systematically through the barn, searching for something specific. I had him clearly caught on camera, but I didn't call the sheriff. Instead, I watched and recorded, collecting proof of the wider conspiracy. Charlie spent nearly an hour in the barn before abandoning his search and leaving the same way he'd arrived. The next morning, I drove back to Victor Trent's office with my laptop and a detailed summary of everything I'd discovered. Victor reviewed the surveillance footage with growing amazement. "This is extraordinary," he said. "You've documented clear evidence of criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and conspiracy. This is exactly what your grandmother's will anticipated." "What's my next move?" Victor pulled out the inheritance documents again. "According to the terms your grandmother established, you now have grounds to invoke the protection clauses, but I'd recommend gathering a bit more evidence first. Document the full scope of their operation before we spring the trap." "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records showing their motivation, communication between the conspirators, evidence of the harassment campaign against your grandmother." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Your grandmother spent years building a case, but never had enough proof to act. You've got the technical skills to finish what she started." He handed me another document. "This is a restraining order application, pre-filled with your information. If you feel threatened at any point, file this immediately. It will create an official record of the harassment and trigger additional legal protections." "How long do I have?" "The will gives you 1 year to invoke the protection clauses. After that, the additional inheritance transfers to a charitable trust." Victor's expression was grave. "But Ethan, be careful. If these people were willing to relentlessly pressure an elderly woman until her end, they won't hesitate to intensify their tactics against you." I drove home with a clear mission: document everything, build an unshakable case, and then use the legal system to destroy the people who'd made my grandmother's final years a living hell. They thought they were hunting a helpless city boy who'd stumble around until he gave up and left. Instead, they'd awakened something much more dangerous: a methodical, patient man with the skills to turn their own game against them. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. Over the next week, I maintained the appearance of a defeated man while methodically building my case. I let my shoulders slump when I went to town, avoided eye contact at the general store, and generally projected the image of someone who was giving up. Meanwhile, my surveillance system captured a steady stream of criminal activity. Charlie Rivers returned twice more, each time growing more frustrated when he couldn't find whatever he was looking for in the barn. On the third visit, he brought tools and began dismantling parts of the barn's interior, clearly convinced that my grandmother had hidden something valuable there. Carter Lynch drove by the property every morning and evening, timing his routes to coincide with my usual activities. He was gathering intelligence, documenting my routines, preparing for something bigger. Most interesting was Veronica. My cameras caught her visiting Linda Price 3 times, each conversation lasting over an hour. I couldn't hear what they were discussing, but Linda's body language grew increasingly uncomfortable with each visit. On Friday evening, I received a call from Victor Trent. "Ethan, I've been doing some research into your situation. I think you need to know what you're really dealing with." "What did you find?" "Carter Lynch isn't just a local businessman. He's been buying up property rights throughout the county for the past 5 years. Small parcels, mineral rights, water rights. He's assembling something big." "How big?" "Big enough to interest some major energy companies. I found incorporation documents for something called Blackstone Development Group. Carter's the president, but the real money is coming from outside investors. They're planning a massive natural gas extraction operation. My grandmother's property sat right in the middle of their target area. Without her mineral rights, their entire project would be compromised." There's more, Victor continued. I pulled the property records for your grandmother's land. Someone's been challenging the mineral rights ownership for months, claiming there are irregularities in the original deeds. The challenges are being filed by a law firm that specializes in breaking up old family trusts. Let me guess, Veronica's new firm? How did you know? Because my ex-wife was nothing if not predictable. She'd found a way to monetize our divorce by targeting my inheritance. What's their legal strategy? They're claiming your grandmother was mentally incompetent when she updated her will, that the mineral rights should revert to the county for public auction. If they can prove she was suffering from paranoid delusions, they can invalidate her final wishes and force a sale. Everything clicked into place. The harassment campaign wasn't just about driving me away, it was about building a legal case for my grandmother's incompetence. Every crazy complaint she'd made, every paranoid accusation, was being used as evidence that she wasn't mentally fit to control such valuable assets. Victor, I need you to prepare the protection clause paperwork immediately. I'm going to end this. Are you sure you have enough evidence? I looked at my laptop screen, which showed over 100 hours of surveillance footage. Detailed financial records I'd hacked from Carter's business accounts and recorded phone conversations between the conspirators. I have enough evidence to put them all in prison. Then let's do this properly. I'll file the paperwork Monday morning. Once those protection clauses are invoked, you'll have complete control over the property and the mineral rights. No court in the country will be able to take them away from you. That weekend, I made my final preparations. I copied all my evidence to multiple secure servers, prepared detailed summaries for law enforcement, and set up a failsafe system that would automatically release everything to the media if anything happened to me. I also prepared a special surprise for my enemies. On Sunday evening, I sat on my porch and called Linda Price. Linda, I wanted to thank you for being such a good neighbor. You've been the only person to show me any kindness since I moved here. Oh, Ethan, you don't need to thank me. I just wish more people in town were willing to give you a chance. I know Veronica's been visiting you. I hope she hasn't been pressuring you about anything. Linda's silence stretched long enough to confirm my suspicions. She's been asking a lot of questions about your behavior, whether you seem stable, if you've been acting strangely. And what have you told her? The truth, that you seem like a perfectly normal person dealing with a difficult situation. Linda's voice grew stronger. Ethan, I need to tell you something. Veronica offered me money to sign a statement saying you've been acting erratically, making threats, neglecting your property. She said it was for your own good, that you needed professional help. Did you sign it? Of course not. But she said other people already had, that it was just a formality. She made it sound like you were already going to be committed, and my statement would just make the process easier. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their betrayal. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. Linda, I need you to do something for me. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be some excitement around here. When it happens, I want you to call this number and tell them everything Veronica asked you to do. I gave her Victor Trent's direct line. Ethan, what's going to happen? Justice, I said simply. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my kitchen and watched the surveillance feeds, waiting for the final piece of their plan to unfold. Around 2 a.m., my patience was rewarded. Charlie Rivers emerged from the woods, but this time he wasn't alone. Carter Lynch was with him, along with 2 men I didn't recognize. They moved with military precision toward the barn, carrying equipment that looked far more sophisticated than simple burglary tools. I watched as they set up what looked like a portable illicit operation in my barn, complete with chemical gear, precision scales, and sealed bags of fine powder. They moved fast and efficiently, like this wasn't their first time. It was clever, in a deeply twisted way. They were planting material that would not only get me detained, but also neatly explain my paranoid behavior. Of course, I was acting strangely. I was meant to look like an illegal trafficker, probably impaired by my own product. The property would be seized under civil forfeiture laws, and Carter's development group would be able to buy it from the government for pennies on the dollar. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd committed their crimes in full view of my surveillance system. I let them finish their work and leave. Then I made a series of phone calls to Victor Trent, to the state police, to the DEA, and to a journalist I'd contacted at the regional newspaper. By dawn, I had a coordinated response ready to deploy. At 8 a.m., I called the local sheriff's office and reported suspicious activity on my property. I think someone's been using my barn for illegal purposes, I told Deputy Monroe. You should probably send someone to investigate. An hour later, Monroe arrived with backup, expecting to find a nervous criminal ready to confess. Instead, they found me sitting calmly on my porch with my laptop open, displaying crystal-clear surveillance footage of Carter and Charlie planting evidence. "Gentlemen," I said as they approached, "I think you're going to want to see this." What followed was the most satisfying hour of my life. I walked the deputies through months of surveillance footage, showing them every crime, every conspiracy, every detail of the plan to steal my inheritance. I provided financial records proving Carter's motivation, recorded conversations revealing the scope of the conspiracy, and documented evidence of the systematic harassment campaign against my grandmother. By noon, state police had arrived to take over the investigation. By afternoon, arrest warrants had been issued for Carter Lynch, Charlie Rivers, and Veronica Barron. By evening, the story was breaking on local news stations. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final surprise for my enemies. As the sun set on Sunday, I walked to the barn and opened the doors wide. Inside, exactly where my grandmother had told me it would be, I found what Charlie had been searching for, a safe hidden behind a false wall containing the original mineral rights deeds and a detailed map of the natural gas deposits beneath the county. My grandmother had known about the gas all along. She'd known about Carter's plans, about the conspiracy to steal her land, about everything, and she'd spent her final years not just gathering evidence of their crimes, but preparing the perfect revenge. The mineral rights weren't just valuable, they were essential to Carter's entire development project. Without them, his investors would lose millions, his company would collapse, and his dreams of wealth and power would crumble to dust. And now those rights belonged to me, protected by legal clauses that made them untouchable. I was examining the documents when I heard a sound that sent a jolt of icy shock through me, frantic, high-pitched cries coming from inside the barn. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the sound, my heart pounding. Whatever was in that barn, it was about to give me the final piece of the puzzle. The screaming was coming from the back corner of the barn, behind the hay bales where I'd found my grandmother's hidden documents. I moved toward the sound with my flashlight raised, every nerve in my body electric with adrenaline. What I found made my face go white with shock and rage. Daisy was there, alive, but trapped in a makeshift cage hidden behind false walls. She was thin, dehydrated, and clearly terrified. But she was alive. The moment she saw me, she began barking frantically, her tail wagging despite her obvious distress. But Daisy wasn't alone. Veronica stood beside the cage with a crowbar in her hands, her perfect hair disheveled and her expensive clothes dirty from crawling through the barn. Charlie Rivers was kneeling beside a pile of equipment, the illicit setup they'd planted earlier, which they were now desperately trying to clear away. And Carter Lynch stood near the barn doors, blocking my exit, with a pistol in his hand. "Well, well," Carter said, his voice steady despite the sweat on his forehead. "Looks like our city boy is smarter than we gave him credit for." "Let my dog go," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the fury burning in my chest. "Your dog?" Veronica laughed bitterly. "Your dog has been our insurance policy for a week. We needed leverage in case you proved more stubborn than your grandmother." I looked at Daisy, saw the fear in her eyes, and felt something cold and methodical settle over me. "You've been deliberately harming my dog to control me." "We've been keeping her safe," Charlie said, not looking up from his work. "Fed her, gave her water. We treated her better than most people treat their pets. You locked her in a cage and used her as leverage." "We used her as incentive," Carter corrected, "just like we did with your grandmother's cats. It's remarkable how cooperative people become when something they care about is on the line." The casual admission struck me hard. "You disposed of my grandmother's cats." "We didn't do that," Veronica said with the same tone she'd used to correct my grammar during our marriage. "We moved them elsewhere, the same way we planned to move Daisy once you signed the property transfer." "Moved them where?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "You're monsters," I said quietly. "We're business people," Carter replied. "This land is worth $50 million in mineral rights alone. Your grandmother was a stubborn old woman who blocked progress. You're a washed-up divorcee who inherited something you didn't earn. Now, we're just correcting a historical mistake." "By setting me up for an illegal operation?" "By giving you a choice," Veronica said, stepping closer to Daisy's cage. "Sign over the property rights, and you walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Refuse, and you face charges while your dog wastes away in that cage." I looked around the barn, calculating distances and angles. Carter was armed but positioned badly, too far from me to guarantee a clean shot, too close to the door to retreat quickly. Charlie was distracted by his equipment. Veronica was the wild card, but she was also the one closest to Daisy. "There's just one problem with your plan," I said, pulling out my phone. "What's that?" Carter asked. "I've been recording this entire conversation." I held up the phone, showing the active recording app. Everything you've said for the past 5 minutes has been automatically uploaded to a secure server and shared with law enforcement. Carter's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? I touched the screen, and Deputy Monroe's voice came through the phone's speaker. Mr. Barron, we've received your transmission. State police are en route to your location. Keep them talking. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Charlie lunged for his tools, Veronica raised the crowbar toward Daisy's cage, and Carter swung his pistol toward me. But I was already moving. I'd spent the past week studying every inch of this barn, planning for exactly this moment. I knew where every beam, every post, every piece of equipment was located. I dove behind a hay bale as Carter fired, the bullet splintering wood inches from my head. You think you're so clever, Carter shouted, moving to flank my position, but you're still just a pathetic failure who couldn't even hold his marriage together. You're right, I called back, crawling toward the back of the barn. I couldn't keep her happy, but I can keep her in prison. I reached the electrical panel I'd located during my earlier searches and threw the main breaker. The barn plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. In the chaos that followed, I heard Veronica scream, Charlie curse, and Carter fire 2 more wild shots. But I was already at Daisy's cage, working the latch with hands that shook with rage and adrenaline. It's okay, girl, I whispered as the cage opened. We're getting out of here. Daisy bounded into my arms, weak but determined. I could feel her ribs through her fur, could smell the fear and neglect on her coat, and my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. Ethan, Veronica's voice cut through the darkness. We can still work this out. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. This is bigger than just us. There are people with serious money invested in this project. If you cost them $50 million, they won't just sue you, they'll destroy you. They can try, I said, moving toward the front of the barn with Daisy in my arms. You don't get it, Carter added, his voice desperate now. This isn't just about money. This is about progress, about bringing jobs and development to this county. Your grandmother was a selfish old woman who cared more about her cats than about the economic future of this entire region. I stopped moving. My grandmother was a woman who refused to be bullied by criminals and predators. She was mentally ill, Veronica snapped, just like you're becoming. This obsession with conspiracy theories, this paranoid behavior, it's exactly what happened to her. You're right about one thing, I said, stepping into the faint light near the barn doors. I am becoming like my grandmother. I'm becoming someone who doesn't let criminals steal what belongs to my family. Police sirens were audible in the distance now, growing louder by the second. Charlie made a break for the back of the barn, but I'd anticipated that. The motion-activated cameras I'd installed would track his every move, and the state police would have the entire property surrounded within minutes. Carter still had his gun, but his hands were shaking and his face was pale with panic. This isn't over, he said. Even if you win this round, there are legal challenges pending. The mineral rights case is still going to court. No, I said calmly. It's not. I pulled out the documents I'd found in my grandmother's safe. The original mineral rights deeds, signed and notarized, with a chain of title that went back over a century. These documents prove my family's ownership of the mineral rights is absolute and uncontestable. The legal challenges your lawyers filed are based on forged documents and fraudulent claims. When the court sees this evidence, along with the recordings of your confessions, your entire case will collapse. Veronica stared at the documents with growing horror. That's impossible. We had those deeds destroyed years ago. You had copies destroyed. My grandmother kept the originals in a place you never thought to look, right here in the barn you've been searching for months. The police sirens were very close now, and I could see flashlight beams moving through the woods around the property. Carter looked toward the barn doors, calculating his chances of escape. Don't even think about it, I said. I've got cameras covering every inch of this property. There's nowhere to run. You absolute disgrace, Veronica hissed. You've destroyed everything. Do you have any idea how much money was tied to this project? How many people you've just brought down with it? I've ruined criminals and thieves, I replied. I've protected my family's legacy and honored my grandmother's memory. The first police car pulled into the driveway, its headlights flooding the barn with harsh white light. Carter dropped his gun and raised his hands. Charlie emerged from the back of the barn with his hands up. Veronica threw down the crowbar and glared at me with pure hatred. This isn't justice, she said as the police officers approached. This is revenge. I looked at her, this woman who'd shared my bed for 5 years, who'd promised to love and honor me, who'd conspired to steal my inheritance and destroy my life, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You're absolutely right, I said, as Deputy Monroe placed handcuffs on her wrists. This is revenge, and it's exactly what you deserve. As they led the 3 conspirators away, I sat in the barn with Daisy in my lap, surrounded by the evidence of their crimes and the proof of my family's rightful ownership of the land. The mineral rights were mine, the property was secure, and the people who'd tormented my grandmother and tried to destroy me were facing decades in prison. I pulled out my phone and called Victor Trent. "It's over," I said simply. "How do you feel?" he asked. I looked around the barn where my grandmother had hidden her evidence, where she'd prepared her revenge, where she'd trusted me to finish what she'd started. I thought about Daisy, safe in my arms after a week of terror. I thought about the justice that had finally been served. "I feel like I'm exactly where I belong," I said. And then I walked out of the barn, locked the door behind me, and never looked back.